Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, and we have a different crew with us this week. We have Cannondale and TrainerRoad's Amber Pierce.
Hey, everybody.
We have, of course, Cliff Bar Racing and TrainerRoad's Pete Morris.
How's it going, guys?
Going great. And then we also have a return for us, Orange Seal and Specialized, Alex Wild. What's up, Alex?
Hey, everybody.
Good to have you, man. Excited about this episode. We are going to go into plenty of different topics that we have in here. We're going to talk about stage racing and beginner tips. We're going to talk about what it's like to be a pro domestique, or what it was like for Amber, because the rest of us have no clue what that's like. We're going to run through some rapid fire questions. We're going to talk about base training myths, tons of stuff, and also some fun theoretical questions. It's going to be a fun episode. I'm looking forward to it. If you're listening right now, you can subscribe to this podcast and you don't miss an episode, and they can download automatically. You can watch us on YouTube and join us actually live. It's every Thursday, 8 a.m. Pacific, just like we're doing right now on our YouTube channel. And I'd recommend going over there and subscribing. We always have great content coming out and even more planned for you. And also, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably interested in our Successful Athletes podcast, which you should totally subscribe to. And actually, I want to take a moment to talk about this, because we need your help with this podcast in particular. So as we all know in the cycling world, there's an abundance of dude in the cycling world, and there is a lack of woman in the cycling world, unfortunately. And in particular with this podcast, we want to highlight stories of athletes that are achieving any level of success, but we don't want to just highlight that white middle-aged man that we always see all the time. We want to get a whole broad spectrum of voices and experiences and backgrounds that we can talk about here. So in particular, we're really lacking in terms of the female front. And we've actually, yesterday we had a meeting to go over like what we could do to be better in this regard. To maybe it's us that are kind of blocking that. And one thing I want to say with this is I understand like what we're asking for in this case when we ask you to submit your story to the podcast. And I really want to say how much I appreciate you for going to trainerroad.com/podcast, going to the Successful Athletes podcast page, then putting yourself out there. Cause that's really tough. Like you're basically saying, I'm an example of success. And a lot of the time that's really hard for us. In particular, I think for females in an unfortunately male dominated sport, from just speaking to plenty of people, there's a lot of imposter syndrome and even feeling like a cyclist sometimes for a woman in this sport. So I understand we'd be asking a lot for you to put yourself out there, but if you could, I promise that we could inspire other people to feel more comfortable in the sport and get more people involved. Amber, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many women I've talked to. I mean, women who have competed in multiple Ironman triathlons who hesitate to call themselves an athlete. And I want to encourage everybody out there, because what there are so many different kinds of success, so many different ways of measuring progress and seeing that. And even if you don't think that your story is like interesting enough or a big enough deal, you have no idea what how your experience might inspire and help somebody else. And the more that we can share those stories, the better. So if you're hesitating at all, just reach out and share a story about a way that TrainerRoad may have helped you, or something helps you accomplish something you didn't think that you could, or something that was meaningful to you in a particular way. This isn't, there's no like set standard here that you have to meet. These are real human stories. And that's the whole point of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned that it's not a national championship. It's not a race win. It's not anything like that. It might be, and that's great. It might be any number of different things. Like Pete has said in the YouTube video that is so fantastic on our channel, you should check out. There are different measures of success. Ain't that the truth for bike racing, right, Pete? Like,
yeah, we always talk about how you just lose all the time if you're a bike racer. That's what you get used to doing. So that's okay. That's what we're all doing. So we all understand, it's not a big deal. We can handle it.
And what we really aim for with that podcast in particular is to talk about the process. And within that process, there's something that you probably do that you just don't consider to be anything special or anything unique or anything advantageous, but it's like the missing piece for somebody else. And when they hear it, it's going to click for them and it's going to help them a ton. So it's a really great opportunity to help other people. So please, and we're getting submissions and they're fantastic, and we would love even more of them. So please go over to trainerroad.com/podcast go to the Successful Athletes banner. It's the tiny one kind of in the middle of the page, and then you'll be able to submit right there. There's a whole form, makes it nice and easy. And I'll read through those. So thank you so much. This week, we actually have a really cool episode. We talked to a triathlete this week, forgive me, John Tarrant out of the UK. And it was his first triathlon ever. And he went through the whole process of basically training up to that. And then next week, once again, to just prove that it's a whole wide range, next week we have a professional supercross racer named Justin Brayton. He races for Team Honda, and he's one of the world's like most elite athletes. And he talks about how he uses TrainerRoad and cycling to train for that. It's a really interesting interview that parallels the periodization, because they have 15 weekends in a row that they race, and they have to travel for each one of them. So if you think about that in cycling, that's pretty rare to have like 15 weekends in a row where you're traveling to race. And so anyways, tons of interesting stuff about how he avoids illness, how he like manages his training load to be able to make sure that he peaks for certain races, but manages, a little bit of a gap and a budget there, so then he can afford other things. But super cool. Successful Athletes Podcast. You can check it out. There will be links down below in this description, whether you're listening or watching. And then, of course, head over to trainerroad.com. It's off-season time. You should be strength training. And there's a strength training calculator, or I should say benchmark calculator on there for free. So go check it out. It's awesome stuff. Okay. It's the off-season for some of us here. And I want to talk about this because, Alex, somebody could probably accuse you of being like a machine, in the sense that like you're very structured, you follow structured workouts, you do all that stuff. But I want you to talk a little bit about your off-season, like what you're doing right now, how long it is, so then people can hopefully recognize that all of us are actually are human.
So every year I take 2 weeks off the bike, completely off. I mean, I won't lay in bed all day, but hikes and stuff are fine. But as long as I don't hop a leg over the bike, I guess is the rule. I tinker with my bikes a lot during this time. I miss them. But no, I mean, I go completely to the other end of the spectrum. My alter ego is called Fat Alex. So he gets let out of his cage for 2 weeks. And funny story, Jen and I were watching like an action movie the other night, and there's a fight scene, and she just turns to me and she's like, "Is this like the internal struggle between Fat Alex and you all year long?" And that's kind of what it's like. But I mean, it's just everybody needs a reset. You need 2 weeks off, just not only physically but mentally, to focus on something else and kind of have other hobbies. So taking the opportunity, I did a puzzle. I've done some stuff around the house, just normal people stuff, I guess.
I picture Alex like that meme, like that Narcos meme, when he's just like standing there and looking around and hoping and waiting for things. I picture Alex doing that for 2 weeks. So
I normally make it about 2 days, and then on day 3 it's like, all right, I'm ready to ride my bike again.
Yeah, it's been the off season for me too. 2 weeks as well. This is the second week. I have been riding my bike, but it's been like family rides. And then I went out, really cut loose here, and I did an unstructured road ride. I know, it's crazy. But it just felt like so nice to just ride it, because I've been doing short, hard, intense stuff. So once again, I'm sharing this because all of us feel these things. And a lot of the time I think that we look at other athletes and we assume they never feel fatigue. They never feel lack of motivation. They never feel like they need a break, but everybody does. And, I'm going through and been doing for 6 months now, because of COVID and race cancellations. For 6 months, I've been doing like really intense short intervals. I've been doing VO2 forever. So I was like really, really looking forward to just doing like a long ride at high tempo. I know it's not that long, but I was able to just for like 2.5 hours, just like sit at high tempo, and it felt so good. Like there was no structure, no anything else like that. It was awesome. So it's like, kind of like you said, Alex, is kind of giving yourself what you need during that time, whatever that may be. And that might change. That might mean riding the bike just in a different way.
Yeah.
But the really great thing that I've been working on, something that you've mentioned, Amber, is the guilt aspect of things. And Chad actually had a great quote for that. I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically like guilt doesn't stop you from doing something. It just makes you feel bad about it or something like that. And
Keeps you from enjoying it.
that's it. That's what it was. And I've been with these 2 weeks, or really not just these 2 weeks, but for months now, I've been working on that guilt aspect of it and questioning, is guilt a motivator for me, or what are my motivations? Can I pick a higher motivation than guilt? And this off season has been like truly like recharging, even though it's only 2 weeks. It's been truly recharging for me to go through this process without feeling guilt at all. That's been huge for me.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so interesting because I mean, I'm like this too, you know, my inner critic, my guilt, those are things that I came to really believe that I needed, because I felt like if I wasn't really hard on myself and super critical, and I didn't feel guilty when I didn't do things quite right, that I would become complacent. And I thought that those were the things that constituted my inner drive, and that if I didn't have those things, I wouldn't be motivated to improve.
Mm.
And a couple of years back started really questioning that. And the truth is, a lot of us learn those habits of thought and those habits of motivation at a pretty early age, and they become very ingrained. And it doesn't mean that at some point in your life, it didn't really serve you well in certain circumstances. And maybe it was protective and maybe it was helpful. But what can be really constructive is to just stop and do exactly what you're doing and just say, does this serve me now? Is this
Mm.
really serving me? Is this, you know, and maybe it is to a degree, but that doesn't mean that there isn't, like you said, a potentially better way. Can you reach for a higher form of motivation that might actually be more effective than what you're doing now? So don't just assume that because it's worked in the past that it's still the best way forward for you. And this is a great time of year to kind of experiment with that and just check in with yourself. Like, is being self-critical and negative and hard on myself the thing that's getting me on my bike? Or can I reach for a different motivation that might be more positive, might be kinder to myself, and maybe even have a better outcome?
Mm. Yeah. Pete, you've been on the off season path too, right?
Yeah, actually, that's really Amber's stuff really hits home, because what I did this off season was think about how off season works for me and how it's making me better, and how the motivation like comes and manifests for me. And motivation is always a huge thing. I don't really have the like the I don't know, any depreciating part of what I'm doing, but motivation, I just can rise to the occasion. I just have to have enough motivation to get there. And so what I was trying to think about is how much motivation can I kind of conjure up this year? Because I want to, that's my limiter, is how much motivation can I have, and kind of how can I capitalize on that. And so thinking about this off season is, usually I do a pretty hard like start date and I just dive fully back in. And so this year, and usually that's November 1st. And usually I have a much longer off season than you guys. I don't know. Mine's usually like you burn out in August or July, and then you kind of ride the last little bit of the wave in. And then I usually do very little and try to do as much hiking and fun stuff and non-cycling related things till November 1st. And that's been my go-to plan in the past. And so this year I decided I would ride for fun with 2 training rides a week for all of October. And it doesn't matter if I nail them or fail them. It's just get out with the idea that I'm here to do a workout, see how it goes. And it's only 2 times a week, and I get to ride my bike for as much fun stuff as I want in addition to that. And so I honestly think that coming into November 1st, I'm more excited now than I have been in the past to start from scratch. This time I'm excited because I've already rubbed a little bit together, and I'm having fun, and I'm looking forward to actually like digging into training. And so that's what has been different this year. And then I've been doing some strength training too, which I haven't done in a couple of years. So it's hard, and I'm not that good at it still. Like, it doesn't matter how good you were at something. The form goes away, the weights go away, everything is bad. So it's just a fun journey to get back into like what it's like to wind yourself back up and then decide when you actually start training. And I think a lot of people have that problem of, you either do your toes like half in the water, and I'm going to train a little bit till December, and then it's a hard start, or I start super hard, and then come January, you're not feeling so hot anymore. So everybody's different, and every year is different. And so now, to totally circle back to what Amber was saying, think about this year's goals and this year's lifestyle and all that, and think about how your off season can change based on what you're going to do and where you came from, and try to get a better idea of what you've come from, and what used to work for you doesn't necessarily work now. but some facet of it or something about it worked at some time. So figure out why that's important to you now and how it can help.
Yeah,
Totally.
it'll change. So hopefully that guides a lot of us here when we're talking, because we've gotten plenty of questions about off seasons in one regard or another. So hopefully that helps for y'all. Let's get into Rose's question. And by the way, if you're joining us on YouTube, you can type in your questions, and then we will try to address some of those at the end of the episode. So we'll be calling through those and doing our best to answer some of those as well. So go ahead and jump into the chat. It's a lively group there. So Rose says, hello, TrainerRoad crew. Absolutely love your podcast, and thank you so much for putting out so much awesome content. Like many others, I've started biking a lot more during the pandemic, and listening to this podcast has been a great guide to many facets of riding and training. It's our pleasure. Rose says, my question is regarding training for a mountain bike stage race that is 6 months away. This race will be a big challenge for me as someone who has only owned a bike for 4 years. It's 140 miles and over 20,000 feet of elevation gain over the course of 5 days on very technical terrain. It's called the Pisgah Stage Race, and I'm sure plenty of people have heard of that race. It's a well-known stage race, especially in the United States. But that I know that what you're thinking about that, you're like, okay, 5 days, you're probably doing some simple math. 140 miles, 20,000 feet. That's really not too bad. There like isn't a single bike length on that course that isn't without a rock or root. It's just really technical terrain. So it's really, really tough. Those miles are hard earned. So Rose says, my goal is to complete the race and have fun, but I'd also like to not be last. Currently, my training includes a weekly and monthly mileage and elevation gain goal that slowly increases until I'm at 75% of the stage race mileage per week. I'm also doing mountain bike specific strength training 2 or 3 times a week. I've been focusing on skills training as well. Given the very technical trails, I feel that the best I can do to go faster is to try to stay on the bike for more of the technical descents. So my question is, what else can or should I do or add to this plan to increase my chances of success? Thanks in advance. You guys rock. So first thing that comes to mind with this is Rose has been had a bike for 4 years. And depending, like our answer really is dependent, right? Because if your 4 years is like a ton of structure, or if your 4 years is just pedaling around and not doing any sort of structure, then it's probably going to be really different in terms of what we'd recommend. If you're coming into this like and you have little to no structure, anything like that, honestly, muscular endurance is so important, and being able to press the pedals for a long period of time. On race day, I know that your power, if you were to graph it, but those efforts, you still need muscular endurance to be able to sustain those sort of efforts for a 4-hour stage, for example, and to do that back to back. So that's like when we talk about sweet spot base, that's one of the best parts about it is that it's sustained work. And if you can do it on the trainer, even better, because then you're not getting any sort of interruptions. And you can really build a lot of fitness very quickly with that sort of a tactic or with that sort of tactic. And it also is just really good for aerobic conditioning, which in the case of hard on off efforts, I know the assumption is that I need anaerobic conditioning, but really that is largely done or performed when you look at the whole thing aerobically, because when you go really hard and then you have limited chance to recover in between that, think of it like the cables on a suspension bridge, like the Golden Gate Bridge. You have your peaks and then the cable goes in between that, drops down into that aerobic demand, so to speak. So really, it's one of the best ways you can prepare for it, even though the temptation would just be to say, I need to do exactly what the race is like. So I need to just do really like strong, hard, repeated efforts. Now, if you've done a lot of training in this case, Rose, then it does make sense to go more toward build and specialty plans. And it really, the easy answer to this is use Plan Builder on TrainerRoad, and you can do that on trainerroad.com. You don't even need an account, and you can check out what it would build. But if you have more experience, what it will do is it will put you more into the build phases and the specialty phases. So then that way, what you're doing is you're spending more time topping off the aerobic conditioning you already have, if that makes sense. So in terms of training, that's what I would recommend. And also, I don't necessarily recommend like a high volume approach unless, Rose, you're really already training at a high level and you're doing that, because you have, like you mentioned in here, you have a lot to work on, like a lot of things to fit in with strength training and skills training and everything else. So many times it's actually better to do a low or maybe a mid volume plan if you have that sort of time. So then you take care of the structure, but then allow yourself all the time you need to work on all the other aspects of things too. So in terms of training, that's what I would say there. She also mentioned she does strength training, and Pete What would you recommend for an athlete in this regard? Mountain bike stage race, this sort of a thing in technical terrain.
Yeah, and it's really top of mind right now because I'm going through the same thing that she is. So it's really interesting that even if you have experience with strength training, even if you're pretty strong, um, everything seems like it's all dependent on heavy lifts, and that's where the science is. I mean, heavy lifts make you a much fitter person. It's just the way it is. But even me now, I'm really dialing back the weight. Like I'm doing things with a 10-pound dumbbell because my form isn't there, and getting the proper form to make sure that all those neuromuscular connections are there is going to actually do more benefits for you overall. You still get a lot stronger with a little bit of weight, especially if you're fairly new to weight training. So, and strength training in general. And so I think it's one of the things where mountain biking, especially, it's really noticeable. The stronger you are, the better you can hold on to things. The more you pull yourself out of bad situations is how I always think of strength. It's like a safety net. The stronger you are, you can, like, whether you're wrestling the bike out of something that was going to get you in trouble, or you're accommodating some crazy up downs or turns or something, it's always strength. Well, almost always strength that's going to save you, in addition to some techniques. So making sure you are getting stronger, but making sure that you're firing the right stuff at the right time is much more important than the weight. So, and definitely as the load increases, you'll be able to tell if anything is too heavy for you to continue training. And don't sacrifice across the board. You can still get a lot of benefit with a little less strength work overall, especially if you've already put in a bunch of work. And then last real quick one is that it's almost like it's easy to ignore some things that you feel while you're strength training. I feel like strength training makes you more aware of your body. And so if there's anything that sort of nags your knees or your hips or your ankles, it's like a red flag. And like, this is the time to take advantage of it, because you're aware that it's riding bikes. You can get away with a lot of bad technique and lack of mobility and things like that, but strength training, you can't. So if anything feels strange while you're weight training, that's a red flag and you should take care of it. Whether that's mobilization, massage, anything, get it checked out, or at least pay attention to it and try to make it better, because that's your golden opportunity.
That's a great point with that. Many times, a lot of people say strength training stopped me from getting injured, but really many times it just points out things more clearly, so then you can work on them. One part to add to this too is in terms of what sort of strength training you're doing. If you go on to our strength training benchmarks that you can find at TrainerRoad.com, you can find that strength training calculator there. Those aren't exercises that are prescribed. If you're looking for like an actual prescription and that sort of thing, there are strength coaches that are very proficient mountain bikers, like Derek Teal. He's at Dialed Health on Instagram. There's also Art O'Connor at Woo Car Fit. There's a lot of different ones that you can connect with that really understand like what a mountain biker needs. Because like you said, Pete, on one side, we know that heavy lifts make you very strong, but you can take it way too far in terms of the demands that you have for the event. And then you end up causing so much fatigue in the gym that you can't actually perform on the bike. So I would recommend trying to find a strength coach, and those two that I mentioned, there are great options that you could connect with. Check them out. Somebody that actually knows the context of mountain biking with that. Amber, I don't know if you have anything to add on strength training, or if you want to jump into the goal setting part, but I'll leave it up to you there.
Yeah, no, I think you guys cover the strength training really well. I've been doing, like Pete said, I've been doing some just body weight stuff. I haven't even added dumbbell weights, but just working on some body weight exercises as a basis and just getting some of that form and turning that proprioception back. So again, like the form comes first before you start adding in the heavy stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to quickly comment on you mentioned aiming for like a mileage and elevation goal. And I think she mentioned her goal is 75%, which is, I think that's very reasonable. But I think it's important to remember that your body doesn't care. Like your brain isn't counting miles. It's not counting, meters of elevation. What your brain is processing is your relative effort with time. So the most important thing you can really do is to train your fitness. And I totally agree with what Jonathan said about training that sustained power. I think that that's really, really important. So training those different zones that you're going to be using and really bringing your baseline level of fitness up, that's going to be the thing that's going to be the main thing that's really going to get you through this. Um, so yeah, to that point, like, you don't have to ride 100 miles. You know, you don't have to train 100 miles to ride 100 miles. It's not necessary. That said, you do want to have the fitness to get you through all 5 days. And there are a few things that can be helpful to kind of test ahead of time. So I don't know, I'm sure everybody here has experienced getting hot spots in your shoes. And that's one of the things that can happen if you haven't kind of stress test some of your equipment. And I like to call them hot spots as an analogy, because there are different kinds of hot spots you can run into, right? Like certain chamois saddle combos don't play nice together as an example. So if you're used to working out in a particular training kit, and then on race day you're planning on using something else, you might want to try a longer ride in that race kit to identify any potential hotspots that you might need to take care of or plan for on race day. Same thing goes, not just for equipment, but also for your nutrition strategy, and also just kind of training your brain as far as being in the saddle for a longer period of time. Again, it doesn't have to be matching miles for miles and meters for meters, but aim more for testing kind of like being on the bike for a longer period of time. And then you might want to incorporate in a few back-to-back hard days, just again, more of that. If you're training your physiological systems and you're bringing your fitness up, it's going to be there for you. The key with this is really training your brain to understand what to expect, and then also to, again, like, make sure that there's no cracks in your nutrition strategy or hydration strategy. You might have a great strategy to like use a hydration pack, for example, but if you haven't practiced drinking from that, you might get on race day and find that it's really, really awkward and it becomes really difficult, and that adds to your cognitive load on race day. You don't want to figure that out on race day. You want to know that that's a potential issue for you in training. So really, really focus on that fitness, that muscular endurance, that sustained power. The fitness is going to be the thing that's going to get you through, but then you can also incorporate in a few longer rides and some harder back-to-back days just to test some of those other little things.
2 points that I wanted to bring up with that too. The terrain, which is your terrain too, Amber, like East Coast, it's so tricky.
Yeah, it's very
when
tricky.
when you have hot spots and like uncomfortable things, or like Pete said, when you go through your range of motion and there's like a point where your joint really hurts or something like that at any point, that sort of stuff is way more debilitating when in two scenarios: when you're tired and when the terrain is technical. And in this case, Rose, you get to have both because you're going to be doing a stage race in very technical terrain. So it makes it so that that simple route to go over actually is really difficult when your foot is so sore you can't press on it, or when that movement on your saddle when your bike is jarred underneath you just really hurts. So it is so important to nail down those things, because you're doing something like the Pisgah stage race that really tests everything kind of to the nines. It's really, really tough. And speaking of that, I guess, what tips would you have, Alex, being a pro mountain biker, for stage races, mountain bike stage races, or just, I guess, mountain bike racing in general on technical terrain? I know you're from the West Coast, but you've had to race East Coast and all over the world too. So
Yeah, I think racing on the East Coast has its own challenges, but I applaud Rose for understanding the different facets of what a stage race is going to take her. Kind of entering into her first stage race, I would encourage her to focus on the lowest hanging fruit in each of these sections. So, like you guys have said, like the sustained power on the muscular endurance side, as Pete was saying, focusing on form, getting in some good heavy lifts, and then maybe going to like once a week to maintain. And then those technical skills are huge. If you think about it on terrain like that, there's people who could go in through a section at 200 watts, and then the same weight rider could go in at 300 watts, and they take the same amount of time. So I think taking the time to develop those technical skills and throwing those in on your endurance days, maybe doing outside workouts to practice that at the same time, will be hugely beneficial, because you could correlate that to an FTP bump. If you're smooth enough over those routes, you don't have to use as much as your available power. So I think that, and I agree with what Amber said. I shy away from tracking mileage when training for these kind of things, and more look at what the people you've been competing with at the Pisgah would be finishing in. So 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever it is, and try to focus on being able to ride that amount of time. And I think the TrainerRoad indoor setup is great for time crunch in this scenario, because if you look at those stages, you may be racing for 5 hours, but you're only pedaling maybe for 3.5 because there's so much on off kind of stuff. So if you can build up your training inside, it equates to more on the stage. So I don't think you'd ever have to do this stage race before doing it. But
yeah, although
just
that
like,
is very logical.
yeah,
I have done it, therefore I can do it, right? Like,
exactly.
that's
Well,
how
I
our
think
brains work.
what Amber was saying with stacking the hard workouts is where that's super beneficial. You know, athletes, we train tired on purpose, and it is that mental side of things. It's, oh, this hurts, you know, but I'm still hitting my numbers. Like, whoa, like I can ride when I'm fatigued. So I think it's the mental signal of I'm tired, being able to understand that, take it in, and be like, well, I'm tired, but my body can still do this. So you don't turn off mentally. So you're sending the signals like, no, we got this, you know, like understanding that you can go day after day and have that confidence.
I'm always surprised when I'm in a stage race at how fatigued I am. I don't know why. Like, I should know going into it. Like, every time I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad. Like on day 2 or day 3, you know, like it doesn't take long, but there's another chance to surprise yourself. Like you said, Alex, like if you actually, like, yes, it's uncomfortable, but then you'll probably find a point. And I always find that it takes me a while into each, you know, subsequent stage to really feel more comfortable. It's almost like I don't know if I like the warm up is longer. Old rusty bones is what they feel like on the race day. But then you end up feeling surprisingly okay if you just continue to hit your marks and you're disciplined and you fuel well and do all that stuff. I guess that's probably one tip too, Alex, right? I mean, you fuel your workouts really well, and with a stage race, that's super crucial, right?
Yeah. I was thinking that when Amber was saying, you know, testing out all your equipment is, for me, it's across the board. I train how I race. I think the temptation is to keep something super secret for race day. It's going to give me that extra whatever percent, you know, but like I have the same breakfast for workouts as I do for races. I wear the same kit. I ride the same bike. Like there, you have to put those through its paces. You can't save, like Amber said, like that shiny pair of white shoes for race day. Like they need to be worn in, they need to be used.
Yeah.
Like it's it's tempting, and we've all been there, you know. It's like save the, you know, beet juice for race day, or whatever it is to give you that, like that edge. But I think there's more confidence to be had from being able to consistently hit workouts and going into the race knowing like I've checked the boxes, I've done the work, now I get to have fun. So it's like I try to focus on getting to the start line like ready, and then it's just autopilot after that. Like I don't need to turn my competitiveness on.
It's already there.
Yeah.
It's the way to do it. This is great, Rose. Best of luck with the Pisgah stage
Yeah.
race. I would like to do this race at some point too, and because the East Coast is such a challenge for me, and it's just such a different world. I raced with a friend there, Justin Brayton, who's that Supercross racer we're talking about. Super strong, right? Like really strong person, really good technique, and to like what you said, Pete, the strength that he had and everything else, and he was able to go through all the technical terrain when I was riding behind him on the East Coast. I was a very different story. I was not mirroring what I was watching. So it really does help. It helps a ton. So
Yeah, I echo that. Good luck, Rose. I'd love to see some updates as you go through
Yeah.
it. I'd be stoked to see how it goes.
keep us posted. It'd be fun. Tag us on Instagram and let us know what you're doing there, or whichever way you want to share it. Christina's question. This one's really for you, Amber, but we're probably going to like kind of take turns asking some of the questions because she has lots of them. So Christina said that while watching the Tour de France for the first time this year, and she says, thank you TR Squad for making me even more obsessed with cycling. She says, I'd love to hear a bit more from Amber or your other pro friends about pro racing. For example, being a domestique seems like it would be more fun than being a GC or other form of leader because it's much more team focused and your goals are more within your control. Is that true? And we should probably just take these questions one at a time, Amber, you reckon?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, the GC and domestique roles are very different, but I would say that they are both actually very team oriented. And in either case, you're still controlling your controllables. So there's a lot of things in a race that you have no control over, and you really just have to let those go and do the best you can with what is within your control, whether you're a domestique or a GC leader. So The reason these are both team oriented is obviously when you're on a team, the goal is to get that team jersey on the podium. And it doesn't matter who is wearing the jersey. You just want somebody on your team on the podium. And when you're doing a GC stage race, usually you do have at least one, and sometimes in some cases two protected riders throughout the stage race, because stage races are really long and really hard. So it's hard to protect more than one rider. And usually it's very, very clear on the team who's in the best form, who's going to have the best shot at that. And that becomes your GC leader. But I've been in both positions. So as the domestique, it is really fun because you are working with the whole team to protect this rider. But even when you are the protected rider, you are still, everything that you do is either contributing to or detracting from the work that your teammates are doing. So if you are not putting yourself in good position and you're making your teammates do more work for you, that's part of your role as the leader, is to accept the work that's being done on your behalf, but to make the work easier on your teammates by being where you need to be, by fueling yourself really well. Like if you're not eating and your whole team is sacrificing to get you to the base of the climb fresh, and then you bonk on the climb, like that's not very good teamwork. So it's really, in both roles, there's a lot of teamwork. And I will say that being in the leader role, it feels like a lot of pressure on the one hand, because you're looking around, you're going, oh my gosh, look at all of the work that my teammates are doing for me. And they're doing all of this work so that I can get a result, knowing that they are not going to get a result in this stage or in this GC, in the race overall. And that can feel like a lot of pressure. But the thing that balances that out is there's this really amazing positive component to it, that seeing the work that your teammates are doing, it like gives you superpowers. You are suddenly capable of so much more than you ever believed you were, because you can see all of the work that they're doing. It is so inspiring that you will dig deep to levels that you didn't even know were there in order to deliver for your team. And it's this really beautiful synergy that happens. I think I've said it before, and I'll just repeat myself a little bit here in case nobody else heard it, but the basis of the term sacrifice is a Latin word, and I forget exactly what the word was, but it means to make sacred. And so when you win because your team was sacrificing for you, the win feels sacred. And it feels sacred not only to you as the person who's standing on the podium, but also to the rest of the team. And I can say that being one of those other people on the team who's not on the podium, but also being the person who's on the podium, from both positions, it feels like a sacred effort. And the result is sacred as a result. The race result feels sacred as a result of all of the work and sacrifice that went into it as a team. So I wouldn't say either role is more or less team oriented. And as far as having things within your control, as a domestique, your job is to put your team leader in a position to win. And as the GC leader, your job is to make the best use of the team to put yourself in a position to win. So what does that look like? As a domestique, we'll just take kind of a climbing stage as a good example. The team and the domestiques are going to be all about delivering their climber to the base of the climb as fresh as possible. And maybe they have a climber or two who are going to go with that person on the climb for at least part of the way to try to help them manage attacks and tactics from other teams. So that's putting your leader in the position to win. But as the leader, again, your job is to put yourself in a position to win. So making the best use of the work that your teammates are doing, fueling yourself well, putting yourself in a good position on the climb, and responding tactically in a sound way to what's happening within the race. Those are all things that you as a leader need to do to put yourself in a position to win. And that's really, at the end of the day, the best that any of us can do is to put yourself in a position to win. And then once you do that, to try to execute and make it happen at the finish line. Again, there are a lot of things that are not within your control, and you have to let those things go. But the thing that's within everyone's control is to put yourself in the position to get a result. And that's really what we're all aiming to do.
Is there a... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to ask, did you have a preference? Like, do you enjoy being a domestique or a leader more?
It really depended. There were some times where I accidentally ended up the leader. Like I was the domestique in the race, and then I accidentally got into the break that stuck. And then you're like, oh, I really need to switch my mindset now. So, and that was really hard. That was really hard. But I would say that if you go into the race with the particular mindset, either way is really fun. it is an amazing feeling to see your teammates working for you and to be able to deliver. It's a lot harder if you don't end up delivering, which does happen. But I really liked both. I was more often in the role of domestique. That was really the crux of my strengths. And I loved that role. It's in either case, it's really a lot of fun to be on a team that works really well together, where everyone sees how much each person contributes. Everyone steps up and gives 100%. You can trust every single person, that even if they're having an off day, you know that they're giving everything that they have. That kind of chemistry is really amazing. And to be a part of it in any way is pretty special.
I was just going to say, Amber, I think you were talking about the superpowers of the leader when you see your domestiques doing it. I think domestiques also get superpowers knowing that their leader is behind them. And just like you were talking about, the synergy is pretty amazing. If everybody on the team is working really well together, like, doesn't that elevate the team's total energy and everything so much more? And so you can watch the teams in the tour that don't necessarily have the synergy, and the domestiques don't quite put it all on the line like they could or would or should. But yeah, it's crazy that it's way more than just sitting in front of your leader in the wind. That's barely anything, right?
Yeah, there've definitely been, I can think of at least a few crits where I was doing the lead out. My job was to do maybe half a lap of an effort as my part of the lead out. But something happens, an attack goes, my leader's right next to me, I cover the attack, and suddenly we're on the front with 2 laps to go. And I need to be going fast enough to keep my leader out of the wind. And now my half lap lead out has turned into like 2+ laps lead out. But like you said, the fact that your teammate is on your wheel and you know it's down to you, they are 100% relying on you. Oh my gosh, the watts that come out of those legs that you didn't know were there. Like, it's awesome. It's so awesome.
Yeah, there's got to be an extra layer there. Like, I feel like you can almost go a little deeper for someone else because there's that layer of vulnerability, right? Like, all you have to do is empty it, and you can, it's like you, like you're not responding to attacks in a way when it's just like pull until you blow. I feel like, you see it in the tour multiple times when they pull off and they just like they got to stand on the side of the road for a minute or so just to gather themselves, kind of thing. So
yeah,
it's rad to watch.
It's so fun. Yeah.
Next question. How do the other riders view it when a big name drops out of the race? And I think it's crazy how fast information goes through the peloton, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to hear how that like distributes through and what happens.
It's interesting. I mean, it depends on kind of like who it was, what's happening tactically in the race at the time. I will say that there is a beautiful and very deep sense of respect in the peloton for everyone there. So there's a deep sense of respect for the work that the domestiques are doing. There's a deep sense of respect for the obligation and pressure that's on the shoulders of the leaders, and especially on the pressure on the shoulders of the whole team that might be leading the race. Because we all understand how important this is for us. We are all dedicating our lives to this. So we understand how hard it is to have to make that decision to drop out of a race. And I will say that when a big name drops out, we usually empathize is kind of the first thing. Like, even if it's somebody that was really challenging your team or your team leader, it's kind of a bummer, honestly. Like, it might make my job easier. It might make it more likely that we're going to win, which on one hand is positive. But at the same time, like, it's more fun to win against your competitor when your competitor is having a really good day. Like, that is so much more meaningful than winning because your competitor got a cramp and had to pull out, or your competitor crashed. I mean, that's not a fun way to win. So most of us actually, I think the first reaction is sort of empathy, like, oh, like you have this kind of almost like a tension in your stomach where you instantly imagine how it would feel for you if you had to be that person dropping out. It's not a good feeling. And then the second, I think, emotion is just kind of to feel for them, like, and a little bit of a sense of a bummer. And then, of course, regardless of what's going on, things happen fast in a race. You kind of have to recollect yourself and say, okay, what's ahead of us and then keep going. And that's especially when it involves a crash, it's a real bummer, because you hate to have to right away from that, but at the same time, like, you know that there are people there to support them. Standing around and gawking and being in a huge crowd is not always going to be helpful, and the race does go on. So I would say, like, it's pretty rare that anybody feels anything other than a sense of empathy and is kind of bummed when somebody drops out of a race. And it's interesting because I think some people from the outside looking in just think, I don't know, they might interpret it as somebody being kind of a prima donna or something. It's not always obvious what the reason is for somebody dropping out of a race. Like if it's a crash or an injury or they're sick, I mean, it's pretty clear, but there are a lot of other factors that might cause somebody to drop out of a race, and you just don't know what those are. But I will say that it takes a lot. It takes a lot to get somebody to drop out of a race at this level, because they love what they're doing and they're so dedicated. So it's usually something pretty impactful, and that's kind of the assumption that we all go on.
You just broke down the psychology behind the "oh no" anyway meme, which, if anybody knows what's going on there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's more than
It's
just
a
3
rough
words,
reality.
for sure. The other question here, from another one from Christina, she says, are there particular races that are really fun or not fun? So Amber, you did a ton of races, so maybe if we can just pick like your favorite course or your top 2 favorite courses, and then 2 courses that you really didn't like.
I can't pick a favorite. That's too hard. And I would say that everywhere you race is so different. You're not comparing apples to apples ever, because the terrain is different, the culture is different, the fans are different, the field is different. All of those things make up a whole experience, and it's really hard to compare those. I can't pick a favorite. What I will say is, for a long time, I dreaded racing in the Netherlands. It's really hard. And most people associate hard racing, air quotes, with climbing. The Netherlands is very, very flat, but let me say, there is a lot of wind, and I will take a climb over flat crosswind echelon almost any day, because even being somebody who is very, very good in the wind and very, very good at echeloning, and being a larger rider who can position well, it is so hard and it's brutal. And the women who race in the Netherlands, they grow up racing in crosswinds, and they know how to execute, and they are really good at it. And these roads are so tiny and so narrow that you have to be on in terms of positioning every single second of the race. And it was really, really hard. But I didn't dread them my whole career. I had a teammate, Claudia Heusler, one year, who we were racing in Netherlands, and I was really struggling. It was pretty early on after I started racing full time in Europe, and she was amazing. She actually, talked about teamwork, she parked herself behind me in the race, and she would just point to these tiny little holes. Like, she would be like, "Squeeze in there. You should go up into that, move into that space, move into that space." And I'm like, "What space? That is not a space. What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Nope, just do it." And she was so firm with me. She's like, "Move there, do this, do that, go right, go left." And so it was almost like she was operating this little robot. And I just trusted her and was like, "Okay, that does not look like space to me, but I am going to squeeze through there." And I would move into this space that would just kind of magically open up. And it was mind boggling, because it was like, wow, I never in a million years would have felt that I could move into this spot safely. But having her behind me and teaching me that, it really transformed how I positioned in the field. And that completely revamped how I felt about racing in the Netherlands. But that was one I really, really struggled with, I will say. And I will also say, culturally, it's super fun to race in Europe. I'll say especially Italy. The fans love cycling. People just love cycling. And it's so much more well known in like popular culture that yeah, you get big crowds, and people, it's so fun to share the love of the bike. It's so fun to share that with people. And that part was really fun.
You mentioned in the crosswinds, like riders from the Netherlands were able to like just naturally do it. In races, would you watch out for like certain riders or certain teams to do, like when you hit crosswinds, right? Like in a Worlds, you'd wait for all the orange flurry to come by you, right? Like,
Yes.
like in certain situations, are you like expecting a reaction and almost like set yourself up for that?
Yeah. Usually what we would do is we do a lot of course recon. So if we weren't able to drive the course, you look at a map and you check to see what the weather is going to be. And you look for those sections of the race course where the wind is perpendicular to the, to the race course. And you know that those are the places you have to already be in position by the time you get there, because if you're in the race and you see one of those Dutch teams organizing, moving to the front to echelon, it's too late. You're done. Like it is, you can't react fast enough because you're so good at executing. And so you really have to plan ahead and know exactly, okay, we're going to make this right turn. It's going to be, an 8K section of crosswinds. I need to be at the front of the race before we make this turn, because somebody is, if it's not our team, it's going to be another team that's going to be organizing, or our team will organize it. You really have to anticipate, because it happens really fast. And the second that it happens, if you are not in a draft in a rotating echelon, you are toast.
When things would go up, I bet you were like Spaniards and Italians, like, then like things get flat and crosswindy. All right, where are the Dutch?
Exactly.
You're just ready to see. Yeah, it's pretty cool. That's awesome. Sorry, Pete, you were gonna jump in there.
No, I was gonna say. So her last question is getting a massage every day awesome? And I mean, the answer can't be anything other than yes,
it is
right?
amazing. I will say it's amazing, with a few caveats. So it's funny because soigneurs they're wonderful. They're like the healers of the team. And for people who don't know this term, a soigneur, it's a French term that means like the person who takes care. And a soigneur on a team is usually the person who's preparing the bottles, making sure that the riders have food for the race, before and after and during the race. They're usually the ones that are handling the massage at the end of the day. So they work really, really hard. They make sure that, if the race provided breakfast doesn't have something in particular for the riders, they'll bring like a box of special, cereals and things that happen to be like riders' comfort food. So they really kind of make sure that everybody has what they need and they're being taken care of. But that's a lot of work, because you're talking about maybe a team of 10 riders having bottles, especially if it's a hot race. You might be looking at like 10 bottles per rider, having those ready, getting the recovery drinks ready for after the ride, making sure then you have a massage schedule of 10 riders. So it's often the case that the massages we get it's not like an hour-long relaxing spa massage with candles and music. It's more of like an assembly line, like, all right, you have 20 minutes on the table, go. And then you have a time slot. And sometimes, usually the team leaders will have the early massage time slots so that they get their massage done, they can get their dinner, and then they go to sleep. And sometimes you might have to wait up until like 10:30 to get on the table to get your massage so that you can go to sleep. So it's not super glamorous, but I'm not going to complain about it. It's really awesome.
And they're not very comfortable massages, right? Like all the time. It's not like it's just comfortable and relaxing.
Right. Like it breaks down a lot to personal preference. And if you're lucky, your soigneur will be somebody who's been trained as a physio. And so they can really kind of get into like, if you're having any problems, they can really work on you and be kind of like a mechanic almost, and like making sure that you're on track. But usually it's really just a flush. Like you get so fatigued and your muscles get so sore and so tired during a stage race that sometimes it makes it really difficult to do much kind of deep work. So it's really, and some riders do really well with deep work in the middle of a stage race, and some just need like a light flush to get the metabolites moving. It really depends on the person. But yeah, it's not always super awesome. Like, we did have a soigneur at one point. He was very sweet gentleman, very respectful, but he sweated a lot, and so he'd be like, moving his hands like across your calf or something to flush it out, and then there's just sweat dripping on your leg, and he's just rubbing it in. It's just kind of okay.
It doesn't need to be oil, I guess.
Right. And I mean, I did have a case where at one point we did have a male soigneur who just like, I mean, again, very respectful, but like misguided, kind of like, would poke the side of my leg and just be like, that's probably 2 kilos there. Like, go ahead to dinner, but you probably shouldn't eat too much. And it's like, really, man? Like, I'm really, we're in the middle of a huge stage race. Like, I don't think this is the time for a diet. Like, and I'm not sure I'm feeling too good about this commentary right now. So I will say it's not always super awesome, but in general, being able to have that resource is amazing. And especially in the middle of a stage race, your swan year kind of becomes, you kind of become a therapist, because you get on the table, you're so tired, and it's sort of like your opportunity to vent. I always found it was a useful time to talk to the swan year and find out how everyone else on the team was doing. Because when you get on the table at the end of the day, that's when you like, you kind of vent about how the day went, how you're feeling. And it was a really good way. The swan year is the person who knows who's really feeling good, who's really suffering. And as a domestique, that was always really valuable information for me the following day to know, like, okay, this person might need a little bit of extra looking after, or this person is actually feeling super fresh right now. We might be able to assign them a little bit more work. But your swan year is the one they know.
Yeah, it's clever.
Not even by talking to them. It's just by the legs.
By the touch, the tension in the legs. That's what they're going for. Yeah. Awesome. Keeping on the thread of racing, let's go into Michael's question. He says, my question is about warming up for gravity and enduro style mountain bike races. I've recently started competing in enduro type races, but I'm having trouble warming up properly and being adequately prepared for a full gas 2 to 5 minute effort when I get to the start of the stage, especially after undertaking a lengthy liaison or transition to the start. To explain how enduro racing works for people that don't know, effectively what it is you have a course, and that course is usually like a long chain of things strung together, point to point, or it might end up finishing where it started. And only portions of that are timed. And in most cases, at least in enduro mountain biking, it's the descents that are timed. And there's very specific sections. They tend to be akin to like a downhill course, so pretty rough, pretty fast, pretty challenging, those time segments. But then in many cases, you have to pedal your way up to it. You don't have to like race your way to the top. You can pedal at your own pace, but you do have to make it before the time cut, or you have to do it based on your starting order. They'll kind of give you like a tighter window of like, you have to be up here sometime within 10 to 20 minutes, somewhere around there. You have to be ready to go. So hopefully that explains what's going on there. And it's not uncommon for an enduro to have anywhere from 4 to 7 stages. That's usually pretty common to see. So, okay. It says, in my recent race, my heart rate and breathing went quickly out of control, and I was not able to finish the stage as strong as I would have liked. That honestly sounds more like a pacing problem to me. But he says, do you have any tips for warming up for these types of events? Or is this just something to get used to and potentially practice and training? Thanks, from Michael. So you can actually go onto our YouTube channel, and we had when I did EWS North Star, Pete did it too. That was a great day, Pete. It was a lot of fun.
It was really fun. Great 2 days.
Yeah, and actually, I had a GoPro on, and Richie Rude breaks down every stage, and he shows that he just is entirely different. He's like an alien, not a normal human. So, but he kind of says like, this is what I do, and we actually talk about that. He doesn't go just wide open instantly out of the gate and then wide open out of every single turn. He really looks at like, okay, I know that I can, since the stage is longer, I need to govern my efforts because I need to be able to still have an ability to accelerate and increase my speed when I need to increase my speed toward the bottom of that stage. Because many times in mountain biking, if you don't pace it properly like that and you lose your ability to accelerate, it compounds and you lose much more time because speed is a necessary component to get through certain sections. If you don't have that speed, then you just bleed so much time going through it. So it's, and on top of that too, when you get really fatigued, then your decision making and your technique starts to falter. So then it gets really tough. Like in many cases, if there's a really technical section at the end, Richie was actually mentioning, he's like, I'll actually know that and I'll save myself for that section because I know if I go into it completely boxed, I'm just going to, make a fool of myself and end up on the ground. So,
Yeah.
like pacing is a huge part. I don't know if you're going to jump in there. Sorry, Alex.
I was just saying there's a sweet spot, I think, with a lot of disciplines in mountain biking, right? Like if there's a long climb on a XC course or anything like that, there's like a sweet spot of how much effort you can give it so that on the descent, like you're just the right amount of cross-eyed. So, I think 95% is like something that's thrown out there pretty often. Like you're just 95% on the climb so that you're not bleeding time on the descent. And I think Richie here is saying a similar thing for enduro. Is like he's got the long game insight, and he probably breaks it down in his head more like, all right, pedal, not pedaling, pedal, not pedaling. And it's not even to numbers or anything. Like he's probably so in tune at this point that it's just like, I know what I need or what feeling I need to have getting into that last technical section so that I can hit it perfectly. So there's just that sweet spot of like, I can give this much effort here and then I won't bleed any time going into the technical section.
Yeah. And so I guess that with that pacing component kind of stated there, and that's why it's so important, like we talked about earlier, to train your aerobic capacity so then you can have those repeated efforts and everything else with that. But really, let's talk about the warm up side of things. And Amber, it's probably not too dissimilar in the sense of like short TTs or prologues. How did you
Yeah.
warm up for those when you had those really short, really intense events?
Yeah, this is a really good question because there's kind of the physiology of it, and then there's really what's going to work when the rubber meets the road. And from a physiological perspective, if you are really well prepared in the sense that like you've done all your training, you fueled appropriately, you're ready to go. Uh, Physically, like a warm up doesn't need to do a whole lot. It really all you really want to achieve is to get to that point where you have opened up the blood vessels. So you've achieved a level of effort. You know, you've done some aerobic work, maybe a little bit of low level tempo work is enough to just trigger that vasodilation so that your systems are warmed up, your blood's flowing, and you're ready to go. But that's a really different sensation. So just doing, you know, some endurance, some steady state tempo work, and getting your ventilate, you know, maybe crossing that ventilatory threshold and getting those blood vessels opened up. That feels different than hitting a VO2 level effort or, you know, a start level sprint effort. Physically, you are ready to do those things, but the sensation is different. And so some people really like to make sure that they kind of touch each of those systems before they go into the race. And that, I think, it's less physical. It's not necessary from a physiological perspective, but from a mental perspective, it sort of reminds your brain like, oh yeah, this is how that feels. And I can, that sensation's okay. Like I can feel that sensation and feel fine. And so it's sort of like priming your brain to expect certain sensations by touching on those different energy systems in a warm up. So this is a really personal thing. And I didn't like to really touch those higher end systems because I didn't want to load my legs at all before a short effort like this. But you kind of have to do this a few times to mentally be prepared for the level of effort that it's going to take in that short time. So experiment with this a little bit is what I would suggest. Because you know doing a couple of like harder efforts might be the thing that just mentally primes you better, but as far as like the physical side of it, it doesn't take a whole lot. And I will say that the warm up is a part of a larger whole of your pre-race routine. So nailing down a pre-race routine that's going to really feel reliable, that's going to boost your confidence, that's going to put you in a really optimal mental state. The warm up is a piece of that. So think of the warm up within the larger context of a pre-race routine. And then, you know, given your pre-race routine, given how you feel in the races, what are some elements that you would want to incorporate in your warm up in order to achieve kind of that optimal state on the start line? And I would say that the bumpers that you want to put on this are like, don't warm up too long and don't go too hard or too much, because you can get dehydrated, you can elevate your core temperature too much, and you can load your legs in a way that might be, you know, that might detract from your performance on the bike. So those would be just the elements that I would suggest thinking of.
I was just going to add in there, I think the biggest thing for me was the time from end of warm up to the start line. Like, I feel like it was so wasted if, like, you know, like the start got pushed while we're waiting on the line or stuff like that. Like, I feel like, and I've messed around with, if for XC we get corralled, so I would sit next to a barrier and actually hold on and clip in both feet and pedal backwards to try to keep like the spinning going. I actually think that came from Enduro. So that's one tip to kind of keep warm if there's not like a set time start, like if you have to wait in the line, try to find something to lead up against, and then you can kind of just backpedal from there.
And if anything, that probably is just helping up here, even if it doesn't help physically. Like once again, like your warm up, that it's so much of it is you're trying to prime your body to perform, and your mind is very much a portion of that, and you can't separate that from it. So you have to kind of find what works. Those principles were awesome that you had there, and they actually drive really. I asked Richie, so 2-time EWS world champion, Michael. In this case, I asked him. I sent your question over to him, and he answered. So. And it jives with what Amber was saying. He says, so he kind of gives some context here. He says, usually if we pedal up, because there's actually in Enduro, you can either, in most cases, you pedal up to the top, but sometimes you'll take a lift to the top to a specific stage, and then you'll start it in that regard. So sometimes you're already warm from pedaling up, sometimes you're not. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, well, that's lazy. Trust me, these athletes are very impressive athletes still. So he says, usually if we pedal up, the warm up is pretty minimal since you're already, or the subsequent warm up that he does at the top is pretty minimal since you're already warm from the pedaling up. He says, but I'll throw in some different cadence drills along the way on the liaison, which is also the point to point connection where you're not timed. And he says, and I'll do that if I can just to feel a little bit better and to get a break from that usual slow cadence of climbing, or in some cases they have to walk up because it's such a steep section and it's so rough that it's just unrideable. He says doing some chill S turns and the fire road at the top is a good way too to kind of, and I bet what he's talking about there is kind of bringing back in that kinetic awareness and all the neuromuscular firing patterns and everything else. You'll see like a lot of athletes before swim meets and everything else doing a lot of things, whether it's to warm up mobility, but a lot of it is also coordination and getting that going. You'll see athletes a lot of the time too, like runners, they'll be touching like left elbow to right knee sort of a thing. And what they're doing there isn't doing, finding in some time to get in some more strength training. They're trying to fire left side of the body to the right side of the body. Where is my coordination at? Trying to get it going. And
I think
that's
he's just trying to warm up his tires here, actually. I think he's just like an F1 car and he's just making sure the rubber's good to go.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially with Richie, with that how much energy that guy puts into the bike. It's crazy. So he says, if we catch a lift ride up to the top, I like to pedal around for a little bit, as most of us do. I may throw in just a few sprints or a little bit of efforts to get the legs and lungs going, but nothing to bring on any sort of fatigue. It can be tough to do this if the start of the stage is on single track. And once again, a lot of this is, like you said, Amber, kind of like familiar, making sure that you're calibrated for the effort you're about to do, right? Because that's like one thing that I always find is it's hard at first when I haven't been racing. It's just like, oh gosh, yeah, this is the level of hurt that's necessary. Right. So that can be a thing to refamiliarize yourself with. And he says, on top of that, sometimes I'll actually do a couple push-ups or some squats to wake up my arms or core if we have a really long time of waiting at the top. And I've seen this because sometimes somebody crashes. So then you're stuck at the top and, that person's getting medical care. So you've got instantly, you're sitting there for 45 minutes and that was not planned. And especially in enduro, like Pete, you remember like going up the lift and just like looking at our arms, like whose arms are these on our bodies? Because they were so pumped up from the descents.
I couldn't believe it. And like, it's not like the hour in between runs did anything. It probably made him worse. Like it felt worse as you would like wrap your hands around your handlebars and you're like, this is going to go really, really poorly. Like there's just nothing you can do. But yeah, the total body awareness thing is definitely a big deal. And I think even more so in enduro, like there's a lot of, like we talked about earlier, a lot of what's saving you is body English and strength. And so making sure that is there and warmed up is just as important as having your legs and lungs going, I think.
Yeah. And you see this a lot in downhill too, like the Rocky Balboa warm-ups, like always at the top. Like I feel like Loic's pretty common for doing it. I think they just like try to get everything going. It's fun to watch.
And they're always just wearing body armor and that's it. And then like jumping around. Man, I love downhill racing.
It's the best. Yeah. Another thing that I'm going to summarize kind of what Richie was saying here. He said, but in some cases, it's the type of like in between stages when he's pedaling up. It's the time to ride with your friends and kind of like maybe detach from the racing moment for a bit. Other times it seems like the moment to very much, ride on your own and be in your own space. But those liaisons, like the connections between the stages are really like, they're great opportunities for you to prepare yourself mentally for whatever's coming up. And also physically, in most cases, if you have to pedal up, you don't have to do a lot on top of that. You're probably physically warm, but mentally is a different story. And really a trait of very good athletes like this, and you look at downhill skiing, you look at anything else, they're athletes that can, without any sort of, large scale physical work, mentally turn themselves completely on and be ready to go. That is an absolute skill to have. And that's one that's really unique to enduro. You see that though, across everything. You see that in road racing, when it's that GC leader's time to go, they have to be mentally 100% turned on. And that's a skill to learn. So the cool part about enduro is that you do get these like very polarized breaks in performance where it's like not timed, cruise at your own pace, timed, very intense. So the good news is you get a ton of exercise kind of in that regard to be able to really turn your brain on from one moment to the next. And then I think it is important, like you said, to turn it off sometimes in between the stages. Like for Pete and I, there were like silent pedals sometimes where Pete and I would just kind of drift apart. And then there were other times where it was, the time for us to connect and to chat. So, but man, it's so much fun. Like enduro racing is a blast, right, Pete?
We should do more of it.
Yeah, we should. I think so. It's also terrifying, at least the race we did.
Oh man, I crashed so many times. I almost was saying like the pacing is for sure. I never crashed in the first half of every stage. I always crashed in the last third or last quarter of every stage. So who knows what that means? It probably means
You should have
pacing.
no, I think you should have done push-ups at the top.
Oh yeah, next time. Next time.
You live and learn.
Yep.
Yeah.
And thanks, Richie, because I know he's watching right now. So thanks for sending in the tips. Pretty cool to have world champs watching like that. And thanks for helping Michael out. Pretty cool. Okay, some rapid fire questions. Let's get into it. From Brian, he says, is there any problem? This is where we famously don't answer things in rapid fire fashion, by the way. So he says, is there any problem with doing all of my workouts in erg mode? If so, what's a good rule of thumb to determine which workouts to do in erg and which to do in standard? Pete, do you want to take this one since you're kind of like the product guy with the app?
Yeah, let's do it. Short shorts are like the perfect example where it's really hard and really easy. Trainers work erg trainers work magically for this, and that's what they're built for. That's why they're there. Unfortunately, not all trainers are created equal. Different companies have different priorities and ideas on what works best. We try to do the best with what they give us. Sometimes we can do a lot. Sometimes we can't do as much as we wish we could. One of the things that helps is easier gearing, makes your trainer slightly more responsive. Ramp tests are also magical erg. For most people, running your ramp test in erg mode makes it really easy. You just kind of disconnect and push the pedals. But if you do all your training in resistance mode, do your ramp test in resistance mode. Always train and test the same way. And then lastly, in the desktop app, if you want to change modes really quickly, we have hotkeys. We have a lot of hotkeys, but in this case, T changes your trainer mode. So you can actually cycle through if you have a keyboard nearby or your laptop right there.
Alex, you just experienced.
Yes.
Sorry, Pete. Yeah. Alex, you're just experiencing this now, aren't you?
This is my my go-to now. I feel like anything that doesn't have a power recommendation is kind of how I'd blanket statement it. Like if you can't, like for me, 45-second seated accelerations is a huge example. We do a workout that's endurance pace, and then every 10 minutes you pick up the pace seated, and you're just trying to grind a big gear over, but there's no power to it. There's not like hit 700 watts or hit 500 watts. It's just you're going for the feeling of trying to accelerate that gear and keep shifting so you're never on top of it. So this T key for me has been clutch.
Yeah, and that's like workouts like Pettit +1 that will have those accelerations. I know that they still have a prescribed power for that sort of sprint, but if you read the workout text, Chad's saying just spin up as quickly as you can, stay seated, or he's giving you specific instructions. It's less about the power. And in most cases, we have that there. So then your trainer can ramp up resistance. So then you're pushing against a hard gear like that. So it feels like a sprint, but you can easily just switch it out like that and hit T. Just know that when you hit T, if you are like, for example, in a really easy gear or a really hard gear and you hit T, that might feel like a very big jarring switch from wherever you are at in that moment. So it's good to keep that in mind. I would say, like, to add to this just a little bit. So when you have intervals and the whole reason that people are asking this is when you have intervals that are really short and stacked closely together, it takes a while for the trainer to ramp up to resistance and then drop off. And it's funny, I'll point this out. We always get complaints on people saying that it doesn't drop me back down soon enough, but we hardly ever get complaints about people saying it takes too long to ramp me up to the target power. So just saying. But usually if it's 3 seconds late, it's also 3 seconds late on the other side. So interestingly, you kind of get the same work, but I totally understand it. It's frustrating if it feels decoupled. So that's a good opportunity for you to change those trainer modes and then to be able to do that. So,
and I forgot one of the most important pieces of this last rapid fire question because we are moving so fast. There's a new power match. There's a new power match we have that's much better. It's pretty much better across the board. We've run it. I guess it's been a few months now, but we're actually going to swap it over to be our standard power match because it is better, and it's taking a lot more. It's taking into a lot more things into account, and definitely people are getting much quicker responses with their trainers, and a lot of the things that people complain about with not moving quick enough is been solved. It's not perfect. It probably never will be, but it is much, much better. So keep an eye out for that. And it's on desktop right now, and it's coming out in the new mobile app. So it's there if you want it.
This
Forgive
is
me for
hands
being
down my favorite feature. Like,
Yeah, Alex.
for people that don't know what this is, like, so you pair your trainer and you pair your power meter, and it automatically picks up your power meter as a source of truth, and then erg modes your trainer to match your power meter. So you're racing, training inside, training outside, all on the same numbers.
It's amazing.
Just so we're clear, this is the best thing ever.
Yes. For Alex is a data junkie like the rest of us, so it's absolutely what he wants to have. And if I may be so bold, it's best in class in terms of that feature. So it's really good. And the new one's awesome. So, okay, Giannis's question. This one we will do pretty rapid fire. Amber, maybe you want to take this one. How often do I take the ramp test?
Yeah, our standard recommendation is every 4 to 6 weeks. And that's, if you're following one of our plans, automatically it's going to be in there when we feel like you've done, 3-week block, recovery week, and then take your ramp test. But really it's just as often as you feel you need it. I just took one a couple days ago. I took my own off season as well. I took some time off, to not full time off, but just time off structure. So I was focusing on mountain bike skills, riding around, not doing structure, just enjoying my bike, spending a lot of time off road. And having not done a lot of structure, I knew that was going to affect my FTP somewhat. So now I want to get back to structured training. I took a ramp test to see where I'm at, so that all my workouts moving forward with structure are going to be at the appropriate level of intensity for me. So, yeah, if you're coming off a break of some kind, it's a great time to do it. If you're starting a plan, it's a great time to do it. And you would definitely want to do it regularly throughout a plan, just to benchmark your progress.
Awesome. Jake says, for the rapid fire session, what would be a good set of starter bumper plates for a new barbell? I'm mainly going to use it to deadlift. Thanks. Pete, can you take this one and explain what bumper plates are first for people?
Yeah. So bumper plates are usually full-size plates that are kind of bigger in diameter. They usually have steel inserts that weigh the right amount, and then some sort of slightly softer material on the outside so you can drop them. Because dropping weights is cool and loud. One of the problems is that during this current world situation, bumper plates are nearly impossible to find, or back ordered for like 6 months or something. I don't know. So we usually recommend Rogue. Rogue makes really good stuff. Lasts forever. Costs like a fair amount,
a lot of money,
a lot of money, but it is something that's going to last forever and does have some resale value and stuff like that. But currently, I'm also trying to outfit a home gym, and I've discovered that most kind of regular sized larger cities or metropolitan areas have some sort of another distributor of crumb bumper plates, which are ground up rubber, and then they stick it all together and put it around the steel. So it bounces really well. They're slightly cheaper than the Olympic plates that are colored and cool. But Reno has a place that manufactures them. A lot of places are filling the void where there just needs to be some sort of fitness manufacturer. And so a lot of bigger cities have this. So check kind of in your local area, and those places are much more likely to have equipment right now. Like I think the Reno place is a week back ordered on bumper plates, which is much better.
Locally sourced bumper plates.
Yeah, grass fed.
What were the bumper plates' names?
One last thing that you can do if you can find, like, Craigslist is really good for it too. Any kind of local Facebook marketplace, all that stuff. Take a look, and if you can only find steel bumper plates because those have been made for a long time. A lot of people get rid of them. They do have a lot of different kind of either drop pads or kind of thick rubber mats that you can do. So you can drop plain old steel bumper plates or set down your deadlift if that's what you're going to do. Rogue makes like a foam pad that you can add some height to your standing area. They make thick rubber blocks that are 1.5 inches thick that you can drop stuff on. There's even wooden ones. I mean, you can get really deep with deadlift platforms, but if you can't find bumper plates, platforms are pretty easy to build, and those are kind of less sold out currently. So those are your two options, at least as far as I'm seeing right now.
Also, if you have like a squat rack, you could use your J hooks, like, because the problem is those bumper plates are really big, so it makes it easy because you don't have to grab your toes when you go to do a deadlift. You can grab around your shins or knees. So, but you can also use the J hooks as well if you have like a squat rack, and you can use those as kind of the base point, the starting point, and set them kind of up in the air. So then you grab the bar at a more reasonable height, because it's tough to hold form when you're actually picking up from your toes, believe it or not. So, yeah, Alex, you're going to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, I just actually built out my own home gym, and I went with Rogue because they have the ability to kind of like sign up for the notifications, and it took a long time, and you don't get any of the shipping rebates because there's never 5 things in stock. But if you're quick enough on it, like they're, and I'm sure Rogue isn't the only brand that does this, but you can put in your email and you'll get a notification when they come in stock. Then the 2 other things I was going to say is just be careful. There's a lot of like COVID pricing on fitness equipment right now. So Facebook Marketplace, like check how much the MSRP is, like all on you if you're willing to pay twice as much, but just check it before you purchase. And then actually passed on from Jonathan from Keegan for the mats. There's the horse stall mats, which I've heard work really well for if you are dropping steel plates.
Yep, they're awesome. They're really cheap. They're dense enough to help with the steel plates. It's not going to chunk apart like the soft rubber, and pretty accessible. Most people
That's what
have
I'd say,
some sort
and
of
they're
a
probably in
source for them.
stock.
Yeah. Horses, yeah, probably same supply chain issues there. But Josh says basically his question's about training in bad air quality, and he says with the recent fires that we've had, I'm sure there are other riders like me that are turning more workouts indoors to avoid the poor air quality. I sure would like to ride outdoors more and use outside workouts there, but I'm not sure if I'm just being overly cautious, as many have continued to ride outside. Understanding that you aren't medical professionals. That's a key point to understand with all things that we say. He says, what do you guys think? And do you go off of feel, just limit the effort? Is there a magic number to avoid? I don't go off feel. I don't just limit the effort. However, I do have a number that I use as a benchmark. So I follow AQI. You can use the Air Visual app. There's Purple Air is another app. You can use a bunch of different ones, and they will give you an AQI reading. AQI does not always track perfectly with what you see in the sky, and that's a very important detail. Sometimes it doesn't look very smoky, but actually the AQI is very high. Other days it looks very smoky and the AQI is low. And the reason behind that is because it's really measuring particulates that are in the air that can do damage to your lungs. So short-term performance detriment is likely. Long-term effects are also likely impossible, but you need to do your research. I hesitate to mention studies on this one. They do exist, and you can look them up, just because there have been plenty of holes poked in these studies before, because it's really difficult to test, for example, what training in bad air quality does over the long haul when you live in normal circumstances otherwise. So there have been some holes poked in these studies, but just so you know, if you follow AQI 0 to 50, a score of that is usually good. 51 to 100 is what they call moderate. And then above that is where it gets unhealthy for sensitive groups, then just unhealthy, period. I never train or ride outside, and I limit my exposure to outside if it's over 100. That's my goal, or that's my kind of my rule. And I've ridden in circumstances where it's over 100. I've done that sort of a thing. And no, it wasn't like my FTP went down to 20. I didn't have anything that was profound like that. But I also can't tell you what my lungs were going through, and it's not worth the risk. So that's kind of my rule, is I just don't go out if it's above 100. Ryan, this is the most important question of the podcast, maybe ever. He says, do you drink with your left or right hand? And when you're holding the bottle in your hand with your hand right side up, is the spout down or is the spout up? Everyone's doing this. Hopefully you're not driving right now and thinking about this, but everyone's probably doing this right now. First, left or right hand?
Right hand.
Right hand.
Amber's right hand. And Amber, your mic might have cut out, but I don't know. We'll see. And then I'm left hand because I
I'm
still
right hand.
can't.
I was
Amber,
muted.
there we
Sorry. That was my
Amber's
bad.
right hand. I'm left hand. I can do both. Sure, like all of us can probably do both, but I'm left hand because I still have habits of pulling tear offs with the left hand from dirt bikes and always having the hand on the side with the throttle. So I actually get, like with side loader cages, I get ones that allow me to load from the side. My mountain bike, I do that because of the compact space that you have. Road bike, I don't have side loading cages, but I'm
We're
always
all
left.
consistent though that we use our rear brake hand because Jonathan's odd and switches
Yes.
them.
Mhm.
Yes,
So
it's
everybody
true.
uses the hand that controls their rear brake.
That's a
This
good
is true.
point, yeah.
Yep. Which can be a little sketchy sometimes if the only brake you have is like front brake and
I
you're
was
going
about to say,
through a
I'm not sure
section.
why we do that, but
Yeah.
It sounds good in theory, but then when you think about it, you're like, yeah, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when I do it, I realize this. Your question, Ryan, has been weighing so heavily on my mind because it's so important here. But over the past week, I've been thinking about it. On my previous bike, I actually, because of the angle of everything, I was always spout down if my hand was right side up in front of me. But now on the bike that I'm currently riding, it is spout up. But that changes. This is so nerdy. That changes if the bottle cage is upright on my seat tube, then I go spout down. So I know that sounds super weird, but I have like a whole thing and I never knew it was a thing until you asked the question. And now I know myself. So thank you very much.
I don't understand why anybody would drink spout up. Like spout down is so much cooler.
Oh,
To
it's
like,
way cool. Oh,
it's
yeah.
way cooler. Like from a cool factor, don't just
It's like this.
Yeah.
see, this
And
was
yeah,
my confusion too. Is it spout up or spout down when you're holding it in front of you? So you're saying
Spout-
actually spout up,
down. Mm.
whereas like this, like if you're holding it like this, and I don't have a bottle with me, but if you're holding the bottle, yeah, that's spout up.
Yeah.
And then flip
Yeah.
it, flip the
Flip
bottle.
it, but
No,
keep your hand right
but
side
keep
up.
your hand in the same position. That's spout
Yes.
down.
Yes. Sometimes
This
I'm a
is so
spout down
confusing.
guy. I know.
I could never do spout down.
No.
Like I just turn it.
Yeah, same.
Spout up?
Yeah.
But sometimes I have to do like the bottle flip because of the weird angle of the down tube or the seat tube, and I have to do a bottle flip. And I've flipped a bottle before, then lost a bottle, and it's unpardonable. So
So
sad.
I think it's also how fast you're going while you're drinking. Because if I'm hunkered down, I'm gonna drink spout down.
mm-hmm.
And if I'm riding with no hands, I'm not gonna drink spout down. I'm gonna drink like a regular human. So
Yes.
it's all about like velocity, how fast we're going.
This
I think
needs
whatever
further
allows me to
research.
keep my eyes like forward. Like as long as I can drink and my eyes are still.
Yeah. Pete, you were mentioning that you tried to ride with, what was it? You switched hands for some reason, and you forgot how to ride a bicycle.
Oh man! So we went and I rode with my wife, and we went and dropped off our ballots, and then we were riding back up our neighborhood. We're in a regular old street. There's no cars. There's nothing exciting going by, and we're going up a 3% hill. So it's not as easy riding as you can possibly do. And my wife asked if we could take a picture to commemorate, and so I said sure. And then I pulled out my phone with my right hand, like I do everything, and I start to try to take the picture, but the lighting was wrong. So threw the phone over to the left hand and grabbed my handlebars and like almost steered off the road. As I was like, I don't even know the last time I put only my right hand on the handlebars. It was so foreign. And so the best part is the stream of pictures that I took, like frantically clicking the volume button. It looks like a horror movie or something, as it's like, and there's some trees and stuff. So, and I feel like I'm a fairly reliable bike handler. I can do no hands. I can do everything except for apparently only steer with my right hand.
That's funny.
Yeah, never again. I still have terrifying memories of that. I almost crashed.
I practice both. So I drink with my right hand every time, but when I'm training, I wave at everyone. Like everyone. I wave at cars, I wave at people in their yards. So I spend a lot of time with the left hand off the handlebar just for waving to people. But I don't think I've ever taken a bottle with my left hand. It's always been right hand, which also comes back to like feeding from the caravan and things like that. But that's really
Yeah.
I feel
interesting.
like
I
this
wonder.
is gonna break me.
Yeah, I know.
Like, I just realized I have my food in my back left pocket, and now anytime I grab it, I'm sure I'm just gonna like veer off
Wait.
the road.
Right hand, left hand. Yeah.
I actually
thinking.
I carry, this is once again really nerdy. I carry a left and right bottle cage when I travel to races or when I go to races, depending on the feed zone side. Because if I have a choice, they almost always feed on the right. But
Yeah.
if I have the choice, I'll take a feed on the left if I have that option. Because otherwise, when I feed on the right and then I have a left-sided side-loading bottle cage, I have to grab from the right, pass it over to the left hand, and then go in. All very possible, but just trying to make it more efficient, it's not quite there.
Well, I mean,
I
since
just
you're
made-
spout down, you could just reach across and you'd be ready to go.
and reach across, it would be fine. Yeah, I've
love how
probably
this-
broken everybody's mind.
This rapid fire has devolved into deep
So
dive
Oh, my
drinking
gosh.
out of
All
a
right.
bottle.
John, you just need to create a dual side load. Like, just make a cage that you can load from both sides. We just
I
solved
think-
all your
Cage.
problems.
It's the future.
There we go. I just think I actually need to make a detailed, comprehensive guide to hands and bottles and such. So to confuse
now
everybody even more.
We all know none of us is an ambi drinker.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, one time I think I was spout down in front of Chad and I heard Chad behind me go, "That is the strangest thing I've ever seen." And I was like, "Thanks, Chad." So yeah.
This is exactly what cycling needs. More elitist thoughts on how to do things.
I know. I apologize. No elitism, just my weirdness. So, okay. Pablo says, "What power smoothing settings should I use in TrainerRoad and on my Wahoo Element?"
1
a
second
lot
and
of
1
peop-
second only.
Oh, you're crazy.
Second
Alex.
I'm
That's-
with you, Alex.
You guys are both serial killers for sure.
Yes.
No,
100%.
you got to hear the logic though. I don't think I can put out 1,000 watts for more than 3 seconds. So for me to see such a big number, I need it to be 1 second.
Okay,
I
I,
like
see
that.
it. You can't have the smoothing rob you of your peak power, right? Even
Exactly.
though your peak power is recorded otherwise in post analysis, it's not smooth there.
We've talked about this. If I went through the marshmallow challenge, I would straight up eat the first marshmallow and be done with it.
Yeah, I can see that.
All
Pete,
right,
you?
Alex. I have a tidbit of information for Alex. You can put max power on the same screen, and then you'll always see whether you hit it or not.
But there's 2 separate fields then. I've already got it maxed out at 10, and I already have 3 pages of 10 fields.
All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to have a 4th page that's only max power. That's it.
Then it'd be even bigger. It'd be like this huge
Yeah,
number.
it's the whole screen, and then you just go over to that one, and then it'll constantly update. And so once it's over 1,000, then you can sit back up.
Perfect.
Yeah, having
Yep.
that be the only field on the screen, then it almost doesn't matter what the number is. It will be literally the biggest number.
Yep, perfect.
It's very
I just have
devastating.
four. I just
Peak
have
logic.
4 pages of max power on my screen.
It actually sits at the top of every field, always. It's like maps, but max power as well. Yeah.
Mine, I think that there's different times require different smoothings.
Yes.
So my interval screen is 3 second. On TrainerRoad in the app, I use 5 second. And then regular old rides. This is gonna
Don't say 10 second, please. Not 30. Just
1 minute average only.
30-minute normalized power.
No, I was just talking about this. You need a 5-minute rolling normalized power. Last 5-minute rolling normalized power. That's all I would really look at. No, I'm just kidding. That's
Here,
a
I'll break your mind. You just set it to lap every 5 minutes
Yeah.
and then lap normalized power.
well, no, you want up to lap every second, so it's the previous 5 minutes. Anyways,
Yeah.
that's really deep. But no, I'm a 7 second. Some setting like 10 years ago, someone told me 7 seconds is the way to go, and so I've just used 7 seconds for a long time. So my regular just stare at my screen, my computer is 7 seconds, but 3 seconds
we're
for
serial killers.
Yes.
I do.
That's not even an even number.
It's even better that way.
I do 5 second inside and 10 second outside. And the reason that I do 10 second outside is because of my interval training outside. It allows me to, it stops me from being like a ADHD little Yorkie dog and chasing the tennis ball so much and constantly going up and down on that power target. It keeps me smooth, but at the same time, it stops me from, from going to the point where I'm missing out on what I'm actually doing. So I'm a 5 and 10, 5 inside, 10 out. So
I just do 1 second. And I haven't actually given this a lot of thought. I think it's just because that's how I started doing it and I've just gotten used to it. But I don't chase the number around too much. I think especially when I'm outside, I'm trying to use the power meter to calibrate my RPE. So if I'm doing a 10 or a 15-minute effort, for example, I'll look at the power meter more in that first minute, but then I'll get a sense of, okay, at this cadence, this is kind of the pressure I'm looking for on the pedals. And then I'll get into a rhythm and then I won't look at the power meter quite as much. And it's just going to be like an infrequent glancing down. So I think I'm kind of like power smoothing in my mind, maybe.
Serial killer.
But
we're just working on
actually,
smooth pedal strokes. We don't want the computer to smooth it for us.
Right. I'm tuning into the sensations and not just the numbers.
That's the smart thing to do. Like if you have to calibrate whatever the numbers say to your effort, and then with outside workouts, it's always better to hold on to that effort. I think this year was the year that I moved from 5 seconds to 10 seconds. And I think it's because I was doing so much VO2 and I just had this huge fade in RPE, opposite of fade, just like basically Mount Everest, like going straight up the thing. Like I got so used to at the beginning of my intervals feeling like, yeah, this is fine. And at the end of the intervals feeling like death, I am on its door and it's like right behind me. So it just, the one hard thing about locking into effort when it's like a really high intensity interval is that effort feels just so different. Like RPE quickly decouples in that scenario versus sweet spot or even like threshold work. You can kind of lock into that feeling and hold it a little better. So I think that's why I've gone to 10, but.
Funny story. I train a lot with a guy named Daniel Munoz, and he's probably like 15, maybe 20 kilos heavier than I am. Sorry, Daniel, if that's wrong. So every time up a climb, like the first climb of the day, we'll always just shout out our power numbers to each other, just like, because we should be like 30-ish apart. So it's like another calibration. Yes, I'm a nerd. We've kind of established that at this point. So one day I was calling him out and he's like, same number. I was like, did I just gain so much weight? And by the time we got to the top of the climb, we realized that I was the last one to use his head unit and he was actually connected to my power meter. So I had a 10-minute long heart attack that somehow I was now Daniel's weight. Crisis averted. He was connected to my power meter trying to get my TSS.
That's smart.
I feel like this could be a new feature, just like a tiny little megaphone on your power meter shouting out your power.
Oh man, Nate would love that. Nate wants to know the power of everybody, all of us, all around.
Well, if you leave the notifications on the Garmin, it kind of is. Has anybody ever done that? Like when you have such a small band, it yells at you. Like overpower, underpower, overpower, underpower.
It's like, aggressive.
Get it. That.
Yeah, it's too much. Too much. Let's go into Trey's question. Not a rapid fire now. We have 2 more questions. I think we can get through these. He says, a couple of quick questions. As a new cyclist and a person that is going to be interested in races next year, I want to be as fit as I can be next year. So when people talk about going into the base season, which I understand is basically now, how does this help my fitness in the future? This is a great question of basically like, hey, I'm already fit. I've been doing this. And like, do I really need to go back and do base training? So he says, I want to be motivated and know that the time I'm putting in on the saddle is for a good reason during the winter. So I just want a good understanding of how it fits into my overall fitness. If I set up a TrainerRoad plan that has base for the winter, will it negatively impact that, or will I negatively impact that by doing group rides and hard races every now and again, maybe once or twice a week even? And of course, those would be very intense threshold efforts for around 30 to 60 minutes, I'm guessing. So would it be better to stay away from those at all? Do less than 2 a week? What are your suggestions on that? And then finally, he says, any guidance on these would be very helpful to me and maybe others. Really appreciate the podcast, and I'm looking forward to really using TrainerRoad more like I should. Good to hear, Trey. You're about to get faster, which is the good news. Yay. One thing probably the best thing to start off on with this is the goal of base training. Because it could make sense that like you do base training once, then after that, if you continue to ride pretty regularly, you don't need to do it again. That could be like I could see the logic string that would lead you to that. But the thing is, as you start to focus on other energy systems and as you start to build your fitness in very particular ways, it doesn't allow you to continue to focus on the other things. It's kind of like golfers always talk about, they can kind of choose to be really good off the tee or really good around the green, but it's really hard for them to be able to focus on both of them. But this is much more literal and much more measurable in the world of cycling. Aerobic conditioning is something that's very specific, that takes specific sort of work, and high intensity work, race specific efforts, also very intentional work. And they don't necessarily work together in all aspects in terms of training. One doesn't just raise the tide equally in the other. So it's really there's a need for base training in everyone's schedule, and if not, perhaps not even just one point in the year, but perhaps multiple points in the year. And you'll see that in our training plans, where even if you're doing something that's a high intensity one, you'll still be doing aerobic work within that. So I guess it's probably best to talk about the kind of like the goals of base training, which are basically aerobic conditioning and muscular endurance. Amber, maybe you can kind of like draw a physical metaphor for us, or a mental metaphor, so that we can kind of visualize it.
Yeah. I like the metaphor of building the house. Some people will talk about this as like the base of the pyramid, but it's the foundation of everything that you're going to do later in the season. So the way I kind of think about it is the main adaptations that you'll gain from aerobic conditioning with base training are really kind of the circulatory system and your energy delivery system. So that would be like your mitochondria and your vasculature. And you can think of these things as kind of like, if you're building a house, you need to install the plumbing and the electrical. So circulation is your plumbing, electrical is your energy delivery systems. And when you do lower intensity work for that aerobic specific conditioning, you are triggering these adaptations. And the adaptations are things like increases in vascularization. So you're actually building more blood vessels to deliver blood more effectively to your muscles that are going to be doing the work. You are making new mitochondria, but you're also reactivating older existing mitochondria. So those existing mitochondria, you start to create all of the substrates those mitochondria need to work more effectively. So not only are you making new mitochondria, but you're making existing mitochondria work more effectively. And all of those things are the things that you need in order to do things like VO2 max work and anaerobic work. So yeah, you can jump in and start doing VO2 max work. You can jump in and start doing sprint work, but the quality of that work will not be as good because you don't have as much vascularization. You don't have as much capacity to generate and deliver energy to the systems that need it. So you want to build your capacity, so plumbing and electrical, in order to do that work later on. So those are two pieces of it. The other piece is the mechanical piece, which is training those motor patterns, and just something as simple as getting the tendons in your knees and ankles and the range of motion in your hips used to pedaling. Because if you jump in and do a huge week off the couch, you're setting yourself up for the potential for injury. So all of these things are just kind of priming the systems to be able to accept higher level work. Like if you jump in and you start doing like really overgeared sprints, that's going to be really tough on your knees if you haven't laid this foundation of good motor patterns, kind of getting those tendons used to this type of stress. All of these things will provide the foundation for you to do that higher level work. And then when you get to the higher level work, the quality of that work will be so much more depending on the quality of the aerobic conditioning that you did to begin with. So that's kind of, think of it as you're building a house and you need to have really good quality plumbing and really good quality electrical so that when you get down the road, those systems are in place for you to do that quality work.
And now that's an awesome explanation, by the way, Amber. We should make that a quick clip. That was great to explain base training and the reason behind it. But with that, now let's talk about the interruption. And this is a really common question, right, Pete? It's like base training, little ring only. If you ever hit that big ring, you might as well quit and start over with base training.
Yeah. It effectively wipes the slate clean and you have to rewind 2 months.
Yeah. Right.
but I think it's just like everybody says, like, how could I possibly race during base phase? Like, or if you get started training late in the season and racing starts, like, what am I supposed to do? I have to race and do base training at the same time. And the thing is, like, training prepares you for racing. That's it. You can always race. You could race off the couch if you wanted to. You would just be less prepared. So
Right.
it's not that they fly in each other's faces. It's just one allows you to be more prepared for the other. And so some people respond really well to racing, and it doesn't detrimentally impact their training. And other people find it hard to kind of juggle both. And so I would say if you're really racing 1 or 2 times a week, you're going to find it probably detrimental to your training. I would save it up for maybe once, hopefully once a week, once every 2 weeks, something like that. Give you something to look forward to, and that way you're not derailing your training so much. Think of the racing as like the dessert for all of your training that you did for dinner. Like you get to race after you do knock out a week of training or 2 weeks of training, then you get to race. The racing isn't going to make you faster in the same way as the base training. So you can't think of it as like they're going to just marry and be super happy and everything's going to go great. They're not going to, unfortunately.
I race in the base season very rarely, but I still race in the base season, and if I do a hard effort, it's not like I ruined it. But racing is an interruption. Like there's no way around it. It's an interruption because really, Alex, it comes down to like the bad thing here to avoid isn't intensity, because you're time crunched. You do a lot of intensity even in your base work. It's really like unstructured intensity, right?
Yeah, I think the thing here is to focus on, like Chad says a lot, minimal effective dose, right? It's like even if the physiological benefit you're getting from that race is the same as a workout, you're going higher in those zones. So the cost the next day is higher. So training is set up so that you can consistently hit the numbers in those 3 week blocks with a rest or however you're training. So these races, like you said, are interrupting that pattern in the fact that there is no power target, there is no structure to it. It's go as hard as you need to be competitive. So you might be getting the same like zone trained as you were hoping for, but you're working so hard, and obviously like the mental strain of racing, like you care a lot about it. So the come down is a lot bigger than if you had just stuck to your structured training. But I treat it a lot like Pete said, as like the dessert. I like that thought. Like if you're doing that usual TrainerRoad 3 week on, 1 week off, like at the end of that 3 weeks, I would switch my last hard workout with a race, like have that one day where you're like, I hit all the workouts, I did everything. Like now I get to do this race.
That's a good way to do it. And on the minimal, I want to reinforce that the minimal effective dose. Our minds are totally the opposite. What's the maximum effective dose, right? Like what's the way I can hurt myself as much as possible, or do as much as possible, go as hard as I can. And instead, what you really should be looking for is like, what's just enough to get me to the next level. And then really that next level is to your next workout in a prepared state. And that's why these races can be tough, is because if it's unstructured, then you find yourself coming into the next workout and you can't hit your marks. And then you have to take a day off, and then maybe the next one's hard. And then a week of training is thrown off. And then you really have to, you take a step back. So there's a place for it for sure. Like Alex said, fitting it in at the end of the 3 week loading cycle that you have is awesome. That's a great time to do it. But another side of it too is that when you do hold back like that, it kind of builds up more hunger. Like Brandon Need here at TrainerRoad, incredibly strong athlete. And he has said multiple times that he doesn't sprint at the end of the interval. He doesn't do extra. He doesn't do that. He saves all of that for race day. And he's not saving the watts for race day. He's not saving the kilojoules. He's saving the mental energy. And by holding back like that, he kind of like builds it up and is ready to really utilize all of that mental energy that he's banked up on race day. So there is something to that. And so it's not to say that you can't race during the base phase. And a huge myth to debunk, it's not like if you do high intensity that your base training is nullified. That's totally not true. But it's a structured approach. Base training has very specific takeaways that it's going for. And if you follow it, it's just going to make it so that you can get faster that year.
Yeah,
It's
I
really,
think what we're trying to say is, the consistency and focus on that aerobic conditioning is what's really important here. So this is another thing you can kind of play around with, right? Like if you find that doing these types of races is extremely motivating for you and sprinkling these into your training plan helps you be more consistent because it elevates your motivation, that might be worth that kind of interruption for you. But maybe you need to play with the frequency of those and just pay attention to, like, when you do a race, do you notice that it affects your usual training? So if it's more of an interruption that compromises your consistency, maybe you want to dial it back. But if it's something that actually increases your consistency, that's awesome. And maybe you want to incorporate that. Just don't confuse those types of rides for a specific structured workout. It's just a different thing. And you're doing it with a different purpose in mind, which is all good because the end goal is just to be consistent throughout your base training season. Yeah.
yeah. Awesome takeaways. Okay, this is going to be the last question for this week, and we're going to kind of handle it in a rapid fire fashion. So it's from Charlie. He says, "Hey guys, love the podcast. I know that the first answer is probably it depends on your goal, but what would you say is more important to improve?" This is a really fun theoretical. So once again, what would you say is more important to improve? Your FTP is a number. For example, he says raising your maximum output from 300 to 325, for example, or your ability to hold your FTP for an extended period of time. For example, he says 60 to 90 minutes versus less than that. He says, take me for example, I can do 366 watts for 20 minutes, and he weighs 63 kilograms. Holy cow, he's really strong. And can do 4x20 at 330. Next year, I'll be training and racing full-time week-long stage races at points and feel as though the latter would suit me best. Would love to hear your thoughts. Keep it up. So the question is, would you rather have a higher FTP, or would you rather be able to hold your FTP for longer, so to speak? Which, honestly, if you're training appropriately, you can probably do both. But just the same, we're going to act like that doesn't happen because it's going to make a much more fun conversation. So if you are training threshold properly and you're doing that, you are going to be able to sustain your threshold more or for a longer period of time, sure. But I'm curious to see what everybody would say here, because very different racers like on this podcast right now. So maybe Amber, for you, what would you prefer, being a domestique and everything else that you did for so long? Would you rather be a long, steady sort of athlete that could hold a higher percentage of your threshold for a long time, or just raise it?
I think it's important to just address a quick assumption here,
Yeah.
because I think that if you have what you think is one FTP number, but you find that you can hold that for 90 minutes, that's probably not your FTP anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just going to put that out there. So, I think this is really a question of semantics, right? So it's, if your FTP is higher, then at 90 minutes, you can hold a higher level of power. And we see this question a lot. And I think it's just a confusing concept, because in some sense, FTP is kind of an arbitrary concept. It's sort of like, okay, we decided that, if you can hold this for this long, theoretically at 1 hour, then that's this label. And it's not, there is some it is meaningful in a physiological sense, but it's really an arbitrary label. But the point is that I would 100% want to increase my FTP, because that means that, the higher my FTP is, then the higher the power output that I can hold for 90 minutes would be. So I don't think this is a one or the other situation. You
broke the question,
you're asking
Amber.
is like, should I raise my FTP or should I raise my FTP?
Yeah, for sure. You broke the question though, Amber. Gall darn it. So get out of here with science. But it's totally true. Like if you're training it, you're going to get more, right? But I do understand what he's saying, because if you're doing like short and intense sort of training instead of working on sustained work, even if your FTP is at one spot, it's going to be harder to hold that FTP for, a greater percentage of that hour. It's just going to be tougher if you're not in the practice of it, working on sustained work. And there are certain athletes, and really it's a good sign of very good aerobic conditioning when you can hold a higher percentage of your FTP for a longer period of time. That's like a trait that you see of very trained athletes. And I'm sure something, Amber, that you got to enjoy as a pro athlete, where you got to the point where you could sustain that enjoy. Yeah. But when you put in, years upon years of training, that sort of a thing, that's one of the perks that you get, is you can usually put out power for more. But what about you, Pete? would you rather just have a higher FTP or be able to sustain power longer? Because you're like a crit guy, but also a breakaway guy.
Yeah, it's higher FTP. Higher FTP almost always wins, right? And I think it's more about conjuring some number out of thin air and then trying to hold that for some amount of time. Like that's way more fun. Like let's make it say, let's make the power meter say 400 and see how long you can hold it. And then it doesn't really matter what your threshold is. It just matters that you can hold 400 watts for X minutes or something like that.
This is not structured training. Don't follow that plan.
Yeah, don't do this actually. No, I'm all about threshold, and the higher the threshold goes, the easier the anaerobic efforts are. So for me, it kind of mitigates the high end stuff a little bit. The higher my threshold is, so even there's no reason. Hopefully I never have to pedal hard for 90 minutes in a row. Like I'll just cross my fingers that never happens to me. But
you are doing Cape Epic, so have fun with that.
We're gonna pedal at 75%. That's way better. No, high FTP it makes everything easier. That's what I'm all about.
How about you, Alex, being a mountain biker?
FTP as a number. I feel like for XC racing, the 60 to 90 minutes we're not pedaling the whole time, right? There's climbs and descents. So I'd rather have a high FTP and, like Pete said, make the anaerobic efforts higher and more sustainable.
Yeah, really, like another way to look at it, a higher threshold means that everything hurts a little less. Like graph out all the efforts that you have to do and look where your threshold is. Then imagine if it's 20 watts higher, how much less painful all of that would be, right?
It doesn't hurt you less. It hurts everybody else more.
Yes,
because it's 20 watts higher.
Yes.
120% of FTP is still 120% of FTP.
It still hurts.
That's one of the beautiful things about cycling that I love is everybody can go test their FTP and know how much it sucks to go up a climb at FTP.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that it is always going to be better. And maybe perhaps like a different way to frame this is repeatability versus sustainability. And really that all comes down to the sort of racing you're doing. Like, with the way that Pete races, even though he's a crit racer, sustainable power is actually really important for Pete. Even though he really needs to be able to absorb those efforts that other people are throwing at him, so to speak, he also really needs to be able to, because the way you win, Pete, is you win from a solo break or like breaking from a reduced group, something like that. Like that's how you're going to win a race, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So it's really like, it all depends on where everything kind of like goes in terms of what your goal is on the race. So for me personally, I feel like, I know this is weird, but early season, I focus a ton on FTP. Then after that, it's much more about repeatability usually with my training plans, and I'm following cross country, high volume, short power build, everything else. And then at that point, I don't see as much FTP increase, but I see a huge performance increase in the latter part of that season. I see big FTP increases in the beginning of the season. Well, relatively speaking, these days, a big FTP increase is like 3 watts. That's really great. But FTP increases early. And then after that becomes like what I can actually do with that FTP. And that's like what really matters on race day. So, okay. We have a couple live questions, but we're kind of short on time. So I think we're just going to cover 2 of them, if that's okay. We'll go into those. Okay. This one's from Pete. He says, with a wheel on Smart Trainer, should I do a spin down calibration before every ride if I have not taken my bike off since the last ride? What say you, Pete? This is your jam.
Every ride, just do it. There's a chance it's the same, but there's a chance it's not. So always calibrate your power meter and your trainer. Always.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every ride.
Amber, this is a good one for you. I'm pretty new to road riding and looking to start racing next season. What are some good events in the Northeastern US for a new or aspiring racer to target?
Oh, awesome. There's some really good ones. There are a lot of early season training races, for example, race series. If you can get out into one of the 3 series that's going to be on the same course over multiple weeks, that's actually a really great learning opportunity. Of course, this year was very different, but we can keep our fingers crossed that we'll have more of these types of events on the calendar next year. And I will just quickly plug the Connecticut Cycling Advancement Program is a really great resource for this. And their website is ctcyclingadvancement.org. It's kind of long, but they're a junior development program, but they do a lot of racing here in Connecticut. And then it's a good resource to find other races in the Northeast as well. But a lot of those are oriented toward learning how to race. There's a great crit series at Rentschler Field here near Yukon, where it's a parking lot crit, but it's a training race. So you can get into a crit, you can do a few laps, you can sit out a lap and jump back in again and just get a sense for how to be in a group, what it's like to do a crit. And then there's a lot of more experienced riders there too who can help mentor you and teach you little tips and tricks. So tons of really great stuff. Welcome to racing. There's a lot of really great people here who would love to help you progress in the sport. So definitely reach out. And if probably a great place to start would be to talk to your local bike shop. They probably have some really good leads on organizations, events, good series that you could tap into.
Awesome. Thanks, Amber. Okay, we are going to do one more. This one specifically for Alex says, what type of training do you do to prepare for the starts in MTB and cross races? The first 5 minutes are killing me. I seem to settle in as the race progresses.
Yeah, I actually do specific training for this. So I actually start
Amber's
with a
taking
foot
notes.
unclipped because I feel like actually clipping in is one of the most important parts of the start. We mentioned this before, but I use a bike yoke dropper post and I actually start with it down so I can sit on the post. And the workout is sprinting 30 seconds all out and then 2 minutes of pretty much hanging on for dear life. It is a percentage of FTP, normally right around FTP if you can. And then to take it to the next level, you can also do it with a buddy. So the competitiveness comes into play there. And then if you can, perfect scenario would be doing it so that 2.5 minute mark is actually into a single track or a descent and practicing being cognitive while completely blown.
Yeah. So it's a great thing to do. And if you follow any of the specialty plans, you'll get plenty of those workouts. You'll become very familiar with what it feels like to just be like, to watch the threads of you just get torn apart. That's basically how it feels.
And you can do it by starting any of your efforts with just a hard effort, like completely blow out the anaerobic system. And then trying to, because your threshold is part anaerobic, part aerobic. It's largely aerobic, but if you take out that anaerobic piece and are still able to, I wouldn't say recover, it's probably a stretch, but if you're able to manage at like right around sweet spot to threshold, then that'll suit you well in races.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pure nightmares from earlier this summer of having, it was like 45 seconds all out more or less at like, we're talking like 600 watts. And then after that, I would settle in at threshold for 15 minutes. Oh my gosh. And do that 2 or 3 times. It's so hard, but that's a race. That's what it feels like. So the one thing that I would add to that too is if you really feel like the first 5 minutes are killing you and then you settle in as the race progresses, there's one thing to train to prepare for the hard stuff, but then on race day, it may be more beneficial to pace yourself a little bit better too. Because remember, everybody else is probably feeling the same way as you are. And if you can just hold back like that 95%, like Alex was saying, instead of doing that 100, you might actually find yourself able to move through that field a little bit quicker after the proverbial dust settles. So it can be
I was going to call that out. You're not alone. The first 5 minutes are killing everybody. So just not unique, not a bad thing. Starts just are hard in mountain biking.
No doubt. Thanks for joining us, Alex. I appreciate it. And then Pete and Amber, fun to have a different crew this week.
Yeah.
And thanks for joining us all on the live stream. We appreciate that. And also thank you for submitting your questions. You can do so at trainerroad.com/podcast. I'll be reading them all this week. So go ahead, send those questions in, whatever you have, even if they're silly ones like where you hold the bottle and such. We'll cover those ones.
That was the best question we got.
I think it's the best question of the podcast ever, actually. Yeah. So, but thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. And once again, if you want to become a faster cyclist, do so. All of us here use it. Go to trainerroad.com. Build out your plan with Plan Builder beforehand so you can see what it's like and then give it a shot. It's going to be a good year of training next year again. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.